Tensions are rising between Nigeria and Burkina Faso as a series of strong political actions and sharp words have shaken West Africa in recent weeks. At the center of this growing storm is Burkina Faso's military leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, whose decisions and public stance are now drawing serious attention across the region and beyond. What started as internal security moves inside Burkina Faso is now being discussed as a wider regional issue, with Nigeria watching closely and concerns spreading among African and international partners. Burkina Faso has been under military rule since Captain Traoré took power in a 2022 coup, promising to restore security and national pride after years of deadly attacks by armed groups. Since then, the country has cut ties with some traditional Western allies and moved closer to other military-led governments in the Sahel region, including Mali and Niger. This shift has changed the balance of power in West Africa and created new political lines, especially with countries like Nigeria that support regional cooperation through ECOWAS, the West African regional bloc. In recent days, reports from Burkina Faso say the military government has taken very tough action against soldiers accused of plotting against the state. Several members of the armed forces were reportedly sentenced to life in prison after being found guilty of attempting to undermine the government. Authorities described the move as necessary to protect national stability and prevent further coups. Supporters of Traoré say this shows strength and discipline, while critics warn it could deepen fear and division inside the army. At the same time, Captain Traoré has reportedly kept control of a government jet that became a symbol of controversy. Critics say the aircraft represents power and privilege at a time when ordinary citizens are struggling with insecurity and economic hardship. Supporters argue the jet is a state asset needed for diplomacy and security coordination. Though the issue may seem small, it has become a powerful symbol in political debates, both inside Burkina Faso and abroad. Nigeria, Africa's most populous country and a key regional power, is paying close attention. Nigerian officials and analysts have expressed concern about instability in the Sahel and the ripple effects it could have on the wider region. Nigeria has long battled its own security challenges and fears that political crackdowns and military rule in neighboring countries could weaken regional cooperation against armed groups, smuggling, and terrorism. This situation matters far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. West Africa is already under pressure from insecurity, economic stress, and political uncertainty. When relations between major countries begin to strain, it raises questions about the future of regional unity and peace. As Captain Traoré tightens his grip on power and as Nigeria weighs its response, many Africans are asking what this moment will mean for democracy, security, and cooperation in the years ahead. Part 1 sets the stage for a deeper story that is still unfolding. The actions taken now and the reactions they provoke may shape not only relations between Nigeria and Burkina Faso, but the future direction of West Africa itself. To understand why the situation is becoming so serious, it is important to look closely at what is happening inside Burkina Faso itself. The country has been living under constant pressure for more than a decade as armed groups linked to extremist networks continue to attack villages, roads, and military positions. Thousands of civilians have been killed and millions have been forced to leave their homes. This long crisis weakened trust in civilian governments and opened the door for the military to take control, promising security at all costs. Captain Ibrahim Traoré came to power as a young and determined officer, presenting himself as a symbol of change and resistance. He spoke strongly against foreign influence and accused past leaders of failing the nation. Many young people supported him at first, seeing him as a leader who would defend Burkina Faso's dignity and take bold action where others had failed. However, ruling a country under constant attack is not easy, and over time, pressure inside the army itself began to grow. The recent sentencing of soldiers to life imprisonment has shocked many people across West Africa. According to official statements, these soldiers were accused of planning to destabilize the state and threaten national unity. The government says the harsh punishment was necessary to send a clear message that betrayal will not be tolerated. Military leaders insist that discipline is essential in a country fighting for survival. But behind these decisions, there is growing fear and mistrust within the armed forces. Burkina Faso has experienced several coups in just a few years, and every new leader knows the risk of being removed by his own men. Analysts say the life sentences show how nervous the leadership has become. When a government begins to see enemies everywhere, it often responds with force rather than dialogue. The controversy over the government jet adds another layer to this story. While ordinary citizens face food shortages, displacement, and daily insecurity, symbols of power stand out more than ever. Critics inside and outside the country say the jet represents a gap between leadership and the people. Supporters of Traoré respond that leadership requires mobility and strength, especially when building new alliances and attending security talks. These internal tensions are not staying inside Burkina Faso. Neighboring countries, especially Nigeria, are watching carefully. Nigeria has seen how instability can spread across borders, feeding armed groups and criminal networks. When a military government tightens control and punishes its own soldiers so severely, it raises questions about long-term stability rather than short-term strength. What is happening inside Burkina Faso is not just about one leader or one decision. It reflects a deeper struggle over power, trust, and survival in a region under extreme stress. As fear grows within the military and society, the risk of further unrest increases. This internal pressure is now spilling into regional politics, setting the stage for sharper disagreements with countries like Nigeria. In the next part, the focus will turn outward, examining Nigeria's position and why Africa's biggest power sees the situation in Burkina Faso as a serious regional concern, not just a domestic issue. Nigeria's interest in what is happening in Burkina Faso is not accidental. As Africa's most populous nation and one of its strongest military and economic powers, Nigeria sees stability in West Africa as directly linked to its own security and future. When political tension and military crackdowns increase in the Sahel, Nigerian leaders worry about the dangerous effects that can spread across borders, from armed violence to illegal trade and mass displacement. For many years, Nigeria has played a leading role in ECOWAS, the regional organization created to promote peace, cooperation, and democratic rule. Through ECOWAS, Nigeria supported efforts to discourage military takeovers and encourage a return to civilian governments. However, the rise of military-led governments in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger has deeply challenged this system. These countries have pushed back strongly against ECOWAS pressure, accusing it of serving foreign interests rather than African people. The harsh sentencing of soldiers in Burkina Faso and the tightening grip of Captain Traoré have added to Nigeria's concerns. Nigerian analysts fear that fear-based rule inside the military can weaken rather than strengthen a country's ability to fight armed groups. A divided army, they warn, can lead to more desertions, internal conflict, and even new coups. For Nigeria, this is a dangerous scenario because instability rarely stays contained within one country. Nigeria also worries about the growing distance between Sahel military governments and traditional regional partners. As Burkina Faso moves away from established diplomatic paths, cooperation on intelligence sharing and joint security operations becomes more difficult. This matters greatly to Nigeria, which continues to battle armed groups in its northern regions. Without strong regional coordination, borders become more vulnerable and threats become harder to control. There's also a political dimension to Nigeria's response. As a country that has experienced both military rule and democratic transition, Nigeria sees itself as a voice of caution. Nigerian leaders often argue that long-term stability comes from accountable governance, not permanent military control. The situation in Burkina Faso challenges this belief and raises difficult questions about how Africa should respond when citizens support strong military leaders in times of crisis. Despite these concerns, Nigeria has been careful with its words. Open confrontation could deepen divisions in West Africa and push Sahel states further away. Instead, Nigeria's approach has focused on diplomacy, regional dialogue, and quiet pressure. Still, the tension is clear. Each tough decision taken in Ouagadougou is closely studied in Abuja. This growing unease marks a turning point in regional relations. Nigeria is no longer just observing events in Burkina Faso, it is calculating the risks and consequences for the entire region. As the gap widens between military-led Sahel states and democratic governments, West Africa stands at a crossroads. In the next part, the focus will shift to the wider African and global response and how international actors are reacting to the hardening positions and rising tensions between Nigeria and Burkina Faso. As tensions rise between Nigeria and Burkina Faso, the situation is no longer only a West African concern. Across the African continent and around the world, governments, regional bodies, and international organizations are closely watching how events unfold. The decisions taken by Captain Ibrahimtraore and the responses from Nigeria are now seen as part of a much bigger story about power, security, and the future direction of Africa's Sahel region. Within Africa, reactions are divided. Some countries and political movements view Traoré as a symbol of resistance against foreign control and failed old systems. They argue that harsh measures, including strict military discipline, are necessary when a country is fighting for survival. For these supporters, keeping control of state assets and punishing alleged plotters sends a message of strength at a time when weakness could be fatal. Other African leaders see danger in this path. They worry that life sentences for soldiers and tight military rule could push Burkina Faso deeper into instability. History in Africa has shown that fear-based leadership often creates more enemies than solutions. Several governments quietly share Nigeria's concern that military rule, if prolonged, could damage regional unity and weaken joint efforts against armed groups. Global security experts warn that instability in the Sahel has consequences far beyond Africa. The region sits at a crossroads connecting North Africa, West Africa, and Europe. When governments struggle to maintain order, criminal networks, arms traffickers, and extremist groups often gain space to operate. This is why events in Burkina Faso, even decisions that seem internal, are followed closely in capitals around the world. Human rights organizations have also raised alarms. They argue that life imprisonment for soldiers accused of plotting against the government must follow fair and transparent legal processes. Without clear trials and open evidence, they warn, justice can turn into revenge. These concerns add pressure on Traoré's government at a time when it is already facing internal and external challenges. Nigeria's role is especially important in this international context. As a respected voice in African diplomacy, Nigeria is often seen as a bridge between regional realities and global expectations. How Nigeria chooses to engage with Burkina Faso could influence how the wider world responds, either through dialogue or increased isolation. The world is not yet reacting with sanctions or direct action, but the warning signs are clear. The choices made now will shape not only Burkina Faso's future, but also how Africa handles military power, sovereignty, and cooperation in an increasingly uncertain global order. In the next part, attention will turn to the real-life impact of this political tension on ordinary people in Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and neighboring countries, where the effects are already being felt on the ground. While leaders debate power, security, and regional influence, ordinary people in Burkina Faso and across West Africa are living with the real consequences of these political tensions every day. For many families, the news about life sentences for soldiers and growing disagreements with Nigeria is not just political drama. It directly affects their safety, livelihoods, and hopes for the future. In Burkina Faso, daily life remains deeply shaped by insecurity. Many communities still fear attacks from armed groups, especially in rural areas. Villages have been emptied, schools closed, and farmlands abandoned. When people hear about soldiers being punished so severely, reactions are mixed. Some citizens feel reassured, believing strong discipline means the government is serious about protecting the country. Others feel afraid, worrying that fear inside the army could reduce morale and weaken the fight against violence. The issue of leadership privilege, symbolized by the government jet, also touches a sensitive nerve among the population. With rising food prices, limited jobs, and millions displaced, people are more aware than ever of inequality. Even small symbols of power can feel heavy in times of hardship. Trust between citizens and leaders becomes fragile when people believe sacrifices are not shared equally. In Nigeria, the situation across the border is closely followed, especially in northern regions. Communities there already face challenges from armed groups and illegal cross-border activities. Any instability in Burkina Faso raises fears that fighters, weapons, and criminal networks could move more freely across the region. Farmers, traders, and families living near borders worry about safety and economic disruption if regional cooperation weakens. Beyond Burkina Faso and Nigeria, neighboring countries also feel the pressure. Refugees fleeing violence continue to seek safety in nearby states, stretching limited resources. Host communities struggle to provide food, shelter, and services. When political tensions rise, humanitarian access can become more difficult, leaving vulnerable people even more exposed. Yet, amid fear and uncertainty, there is also hope. Many young Africans are closely watching these events and asking important questions about leadership, justice, and dignity. Some see this moment as a test for Africa's ability to find its own solutions without repeating the mistakes of the past. Civil society groups, community leaders, and religious figures continue to call for dialogue, fairness, and unity. The human impact of this crisis shows why the situation matters so much. Political decisions taken at the top ripple downward into homes, markets, and classrooms. Stability is not just about governments surviving, it is about people living without constant fear. As West Africa stands under growing pressure, the choices made now will determine whether the region moves toward deeper division or renewed cooperation. In the final part, the focus will turn to the future, examining possible outcomes and what lies ahead for Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and the wider African region. The growing tension between Nigeria and Burkina Faso has brought West Africa to a critical turning point. The actions taken by Captain Ibrahim-Traoré, from maintaining firm control over state power to handing out life sentences to accused soldiers, have sent a clear message that his government intends to rule with strength and determination. The question now facing the region is whether this approach will bring lasting stability or deepen the cycle of fear and unrest. For Burkina Faso, the future depends on balance. Strong leadership may help the government survive in the short term, but long-term peace requires trust within the military and between leaders and citizens. If fear replaces unity, the risk of further internal conflict remains high. Many experts say that without clear legal processes, open dialogue, and a realistic path toward inclusive governance, even the strongest military rule can become fragile. Nigeria's role in the months ahead will be decisive. As a regional leader, Nigeria must choose between confrontation and careful engagement. Open conflict with Sahel military governments could split West Africa further, but silence could allow instability to grow. Diplomacy, patience, and regional dialogue may offer the only realistic path to reduce tension while protecting shared security interests. The future of regional cooperation is also at stake. ECOWAS was built to prevent exactly this kind of division, yet it now faces one of its toughest tests. If major countries continue to move in different directions, the region risks losing its strongest tool for collective action. A weakened ECOWAS would make it harder to respond to security threats, economic shocks, and humanitarian crises. Globally, the world is watching how Africa handles this moment. The Sahel has become a symbol of wider global change, where old alliances fade and new power centers emerge. How Burkina Faso and Nigeria navigate this tension will influence how Africa is seen on the international stage, either as a continent finding its own path or one struggling to manage deep internal divisions. For ordinary people, the hope is simple: safety, dignity, and a chance to rebuild normal life. Whether leaders choose cooperation over confrontation will shape that future. This is why the current crisis matters so deeply. It is not just about one leader, one jet, or one court ruling. It is about the direction of West Africa at a time when unity is more needed than ever. As history has often shown, moments like this define generations. The decisions made now will echo far beyond Burkina Faso and Nigeria, shaping the political and security landscape of Africa for years to come.